The Washington Post writes, Traditionalists urge Pope Leo XIV to resurrect the traditional Latin Mass, and Nick Fuentes responds to his criticisms regarding his comments on devotions. Hello and welcome to the second ever FlatCath podcast, the second episode. Really happy that you're joining us again. And I'm very thankful and frankly very surprised at the relatively positive responses that we got for our first episode. Honestly, more views than I even anticipated on YouTube. I have not even checked the statistics for our podcast format. But yes, as you all know, if you listen to the first episode, the format is audio only, but we do have the ability to have video. So for now, we're working on increasing our production value here on the FlatCath podcast. But we're overall just very happy that you're joining us. So as I mentioned at the introduction, there was yesterday, Sunday, an article written by the Washington Post by a couple of authors talking about a topic that has been very close to the public discourse in the Catholic world, at least on social media, for quite a few years. And we will be taking a look at that. And of course, it appears that Nick Fuentes did respond to the criticism regarding his comments on devotions. So we will be looking at that in our second segment. And without further ado, let's get started. So we do have access to this Washington Post article, and we are able to bring it to you. I have not read it in full. So in a sense, I am replying live as we'll be listening to this article. So I'm replying live, okay? So don't judge, no judgment zone, and let's get started. So the title of the article is Traditionalists Push Pope Leo to Resurrect the Latin Mass. And the subtitle, which sort of sets the tone for the rest of the article, is The Latin Mass has become toxically politicized and is posing a test for Pope Leo XIV as traditionalists call on him to reverse restrictions imposed by Pope Francis. And the authors of this article, the credit is given to Anthony Faiola and Stefano Pitrelli. So written from Rome. And yeah, so interesting subtitle. They're calling us that we have the topic of Latin Mass has become toxically politicized, which is interesting because definitely not by traditionalists. It was Pope Francis, the one that got away from Summorum Pontificum, and even going back further, Pope Paul VI, which came out with a new order of the Mass. So it really has not been trads, so to speak, that have politicized the topic. It has been the institution itself. So keeping that in mind, all right, let's get started here with our assistant that provides our voiceover for our article so that you don't have to be listening to me just consistently reading this. All right, let's get started with the article from the Washington Post by Anthony Faiola and Stefano Pitrelli.
Rome. Inside the frescoed nave of a church near the Colosseum, women in black veils and clean-cut young men listened in reverent silence to a largely forbidden rite, a Roman Catholic Mass in Latin. A celebrant and exquisite...
So interesting how it just starts out in the... I actually don't know which church this would be. I'm actually rather clueless. I'm familiar, and I have been at the church that the Institute has over by the Castel San Angelo, very, very close to that. A tiny, very, very beautiful church that the Institute has there. I've been to the FSSP church, went there for a little bit, and more so to the Institute church. And so I don't know which church this would be. At a new church. Oh, it doesn't say it says at a nave of a church near the Colosseum. So I don't know which church this would be. But near the Colosseum apparently, and a largely forbidden rite, a Roman Catholic Mass in Latin. So it's actually not super accurate. I wonder if they'll, again, I'm responding in live to this article. I wonder if they're going to be actually giving a little bit of nuance to that, because it's not just a Mass in Latin, it's a traditional Latin Mass.
robes knelt with his back to the congregation, muttering in the ancient tongue. Later, he spoke of angels and demons and bemoaned the state of an overly permissive church.
Wow. Can you believe that trads believe in angels and demons? Wow. How controversial, how unbelievable that these traditionalists that are so outdated still believe in angels and demons.
If the recent celebration of the Tridentine, Latin Mass, sounds like a throwback, it is. An ancient rite codified in the 16th century, the Latin Mass was phased out in the 1960s and
So this is really interesting, and again, I don't know, and I don't immediately want to assume that the tone of the authors, of course, it is the Washington Post, so we are used to them being essentially fake news. But I don't want to immediately assume that they're taking a negative tone against traditionalists. But it's not necessarily true. I mean, yes, it is true that it was formalized in a way in the 16th century, but usually when people say a rite codified in the 16th century, they say that as a criticism, as, oh, this is so outdated from the Middle Ages, so old, and you all still believe this. That's usually the line that is used, because it's not true that the Roman Mass has existed for many centuries prior to the 16th century. And it says it was phased out in the 1960s. Yes, this is sort of is true. We do have to admit that it was phased out in the 1960s in favor of the modern Catholic Mass said in common vernacular. So keep going.
Favor of the modern Catholic Mass said in common vernacular. Nearly a half century later, Pope Benedict XVI facilitated its revival, giving oxygen to ultra-conservatives in the Church, only for his successor, Francis, to reimpose strict limits.
So, all right. So what Summorum Pontificum did, what Pope Benedict XVI did, is that, yes, he did in a way free the Latin Mass, but not entirely. So there can be sometimes this misconception that Summorum Pontificum just sort of gave a complete freedom to the Latin Mass, which is not necessarily true. So essentially what Summorum Pontificum did was that, yes, it opened it up a lot compared to where it was, but still the bishops had sort of some say with what was happening. So if a priest started saying the Latin Mass and the bishop didn't like it, he could just send the priest over to a rural parish where he would be sent to exile, for example. So yes, so Summorum Pontificum was a more favorable condition than we are now under Traditionis Custodes, and it did allow the Latin Mass to grow. But it was not like it was just equal to the Novus Ordo as far as its view by the Church.
Describing the Latin Mass as a backward service for ideological Catholics. Now, the arrival of a new pontiff, Leo XIII, has reinvigorated.
That would be Leo XIV. Again, there's only so much that we can do with his voiceovers.
The campaign to turn the tide again, with influential conservative cardinals and other traditionalists strongly lobbying him to more broadly permit the old rite. For the new Chicago-born pope, the Church's internal war over the Latin Mass is a test as explosive as it is arcane. Rightly or wrongly, the Mass has become toxically politicized, its power to divide seeping into secular culture wars. In the call to widely permit the Latin Mass, opponents see a Trojan horse filled with Catholics who pine for the absolutism and severity of a bygone church.
So there's a lot packed into this paragraph. It's such a few sentences, but they pack a lot into this. So, rightly or wrongly, the Mass has become toxically politicized, seeping into secular culture wars in the call to widely permit the Latin Mass. So I'm not entirely sure how the battle for the Latin Mass within the Church, and we talked about this in our episode from last week. We did talk about Cardinal Sarah saying that Pope Leo XIV, Dr. Prevost, is aware of the battle for the Latin Mass. So it's actually quite interesting that interview with Cardinal Sarah from, I believe, October 9th came out, and then a few days later, we get this article by the Washington Post. So it would seem, or it would give us the impression that this is a topic that is being discussed. So then we have a lot of traditionalists that, or as some set of accountants would call them, semi-trads, who are very favorable toward Dr. Prevost, that say, oh, well, actually, he doesn't know. He's just unaware of how badly traditionalists are being persecuted. And then I even saw somebody share from a group chat or from a post from somebody within the Diocese of Knoxville, Tennessee, where they recently had their Latin Masses canceled, saying, oh, don't worry, we are going to have, it's going to be literally exactly the same as the old Mass. It's going to be in Latin as much as possible. We're going to have the same chants, the same hymns, and and of course, if you know the differences between the old mass and the new mass, you know that it's not a difference of just aesthetics. It's a difference of substance. It's a difference of one rite being Catholic and the other rite not being Catholic. So for the semi-trats, so to speak, that say that, oh, it's just because Pope Leo is not aware of the fight. He loves traditionalists so much, but he's just not aware of how much they're getting persecuted. I think that the fact that Cardinal Sarah told us in that interview that he did discuss the topic with Dr. Prevost, and then this article coming out, it does go to show to me that this is a topic that is a pressing topic. I mean, that we have to call it as it is. It does seem to me like it is a pressing topic, but we can continue on with the article.
The old and new mass amount to two incompatible visions of the church, said Andrea.
So this is Andrea Grillo, who was I don't know how much influence he has in the Prevostian's apparent pontificate, but we do know that he was very, very influential in Traditionis Custodes and in the Francis pontificate.
Andrea Grillo, a liberal Italian theologian widely seen as having influenced Francis's crackdown.
So Andrea Grillo was writing, putting out articles that were very insane, very crazy in the aftermath of Traditionis Custodes, and he's a very well-known critic and hater of the traditional Latin Mass. And really, when I say that, when I personally, when in this show we talk about the traditional Latin Mass, we are not only talking about the rite to which we go to, but I want to be very clear that the importance is on the overall, the integrity of the faith and the Mass. The old Mass, as Andrea Grillo is mentioning here to the interviewer, to the writers of the article, is outdated because it's an exposition of Catholic doctrine which the modernists in Rome consider to be completely outdated.
Yet at a time when Leo's increasingly outspoken stances, favoring migrant protections and criticizing capitalism, have some traditionalists fretting about the rise of another liberal pope, proponents of the Latin Mass say, lifting restrictions could be an easy way to extend an olive branch to conservatives who felt ostracized by Francis.
So yes, definitely. Lifting the restrictions, I do agree with this, would be considered an olive branch to conservatives who felt ostracized by Francis. I mean, really, we really cannot disagree with this. And my prediction early in the Prevostian apparent pontificate was that he was going to liberate the Latin Mass, because the impression that I had, and which I still have in some respects, but I'm actually changing my stance. The opinion that I had and the thought that I had was that he was going to liberate the Latin Mass so that they could continue on with the doctrinal revolution even more unchecked. So we saw commentarists that were telling us, hey, Prevost would be the worst possible option prior to the pontificate. And then after the pontificate, they were completely silent and then saying that they were submitting to Pope Leo XIV. So my impression was that he was going to liberate the Latin Mass and thus allowing the doctrinal revolution to continue unchecked, because the Latin Mass is used as a tool of traditionalists and of conservatives to fight against also the doctrinal revolution.
We have turned the Mass into a battlefield between traditionalists and progressives. Cardinal Robert Serra, a staunch conservative who recently raised the issue in an audience with Leo, told the French news outlet Tribune Chrétienne.
So this is actually very interesting. So they make reference to the interview that we discussed in our last show by Cardinal Robert Serra. So again, this interview is making the rounds, not only in the French-speaking world, but also in other places, such as in Rome, in Italy. Very fascinating.
The most devout Catholics today, Serra argued, are those who attend the old rite. Everyone must be given space, he said.
So there we go. They're echoing what we told you here in this show last week. We said this is what Roratecelli, in the translation that they published, what they indicated that Cardinal Serra said was entirely what Cardinal Serra had essentially said. And I posted a clip to my Twitter X profile, and actually, surprisingly, that took off. That had a lot of engagement. But people were very surprised, including myself, to hear Cardinal Serra going to that extent when Pope Benedict XVI was still alive. He was a lot more reserved in comments like that. So Interesting. And also interesting that he comes out and he makes those comments knowing the hostile environment toward the Latin Mass, toward the Catholic faith in general under the Pope Leo XIV apparent pontificate.
I think we'll try to act in this way. The controversy predates the polarization of the Trump era. A polemic passage in previous versions of the old rite, which experts say is still said in hidden services despite tweaks made by Benedict, outraged Jewish groups for its references to the blindness of Jews and overt call for their conversion.
This would be primarily during Holy Week. So Benedict did make amends, did make a change to the prayer, which I don't know who even uses that changed prayer. And I've seen it used a couple of times, but I'm not entirely sure that it's used. It's hard to attend more than one Holy Week service at a time. So it's hard to know really how widely the distribution of that changed prayer by Benedict is, which is a little bit more friendly to these groups.
In the 1970s and 1980s, the Latin Mass became a symbol of resistance for breakaway ultraconservatives led by the excommunicated French bishop Marcel Lefebvre. Lefebvre and his supporters rejected the historic changes of the Second Vatican Council of the 1960s, the abandonment of the Latin Mass, the Church's détente with other faiths, and its empowerment of the laity as blasphemous.
If people are reacting to this by saying, well, actually they're incorrect because Archbishop Lefebvre supported Vatican II, he signed the Vatican II documents, then you're completely looking at this from the wrong angle. Archbishop Lefebvre was against Vatican II. He worked during the council against the liberals, but ultimately, of course, the liberals won. And he was expecting, of course, as essentially anybody with a Catholic mind at the time, before everything that has happened ever since, and that happened even to him during his lifetime, we really can't blame him for having expected what he would think would probably be a Catholic Pope to correct. Now, many things have been written about the Second Vatican Council, and I was actually having this conversation last night. Pope Paul VI personally prohibited communism from being condemned by Vatican II. So that tells us a lot of what the council was up to. It was definitely not about condemning the ideologies of the time. It was a total revolution. And we can continue over here with the article.
Leo may feel compelled to weigh in. On each side of the Atlantic, but nowhere more than in the United States, the Latin Mass is pitting priest against bishop and parishioner against parishioner in increasingly heated clashes.
Absolutely true. This is completely, absolutely true. And it's also pitting parishioner against parishioner, as rightly mentioned in the article. It's absolutely right. Because we have different types of beliefs even within people that attend the same masses. Some believe that the Novus Ordo Mass can be acceptable, especially when it's offered reverently, except we know a reverent Novus Ordo Mass doesn't exist. And others are more hardline in their views. So of course, this is absolutely true.
In the Diocese of Charlotte, for instance, Bishop Michael Martin, whom Francis appointed last year, has faced an outcry from traditionalists, including some local priests, for his move this month to bring the diocese into compliance with the Vatican by curbing the Latin Mass. On social media and blog posts, proponents of the Latin Mass have dubbed him a woke Protestant Catholic, a tyrant wolf, and a Birkenstock-wearing Franciscan.
Again, all of this is true. All of this is true. Just look on social media. All of this is true.
Supporters argued that the Latin services had inspired more young men to join the priesthood and were a touchstone for the devout.
This is interesting. I don't know really, and I'm not going to say that it's false, but I don't know how much the diocesan Latin masses help to send people to diocesan seminaries. Maybe it is so. Maybe it is so. I'm not going to say that it's not true. It's just an interesting point made in the article.
Debate, Martin said in an interview, is healthy in any diocese. But he said he worried that passions over the Latin Mass were reaching a fevered pitch. The things I've been called, or the ways in which my intentions have been interpreted by people that could bump into me on the street and wouldn't know that it was me, I've found surprising, he said.
So I'm assuming that he made these comments to the Washington Post. So they reached out, and allegedly he would have actually commented to the Washington Post when it came to making comments regarding the Latin Mass. Interesting.
Martin ended regular celebrations of the old rite in 4 parishes, consolidating them into 2 services in a single retrofitted chapel that some traditionalist worshipers argue is too far away to regularly attend. In a diocese of 565,000, fewer than 2,000 parishioners a week were attending a Latin Mass.
So there we go. And the article continues.
The new chapel can seat 350.
So the new chapel sits 350 over in the Diocese of Charlotte. So you tell me, is this a move to restrict the Latin Mass? Which it absolutely is, because this is what we are being told. We are not making anything up. We are not making any judgments. We are simply following what they are telling us. So again, it's not really judging. This is essentially what they're saying. They say that it's time, and according to Traditiones Custodes, the whole purpose was to transition people from the Latin Mass into the new Mass. So the bishops here allegedly would be saying, well, hey, it's time. So you 2,000 people that attend the traditional Latin Mass, look, I'll give you permission to go to this other small chapel, but I am going to be heavily restricting it now because it cannot possibly fit 2,000 people into a chapel that sits 350 people. Just not possible.
The bishop's decision reflected the will of the prior Holy Father, said Brian Williams, an active Catholic blogger in Charlotte who regularly attends Latin Mass. It doesn't sit well with us because we just feel like the pastoral approach would have been to say, let me grant further dispensation what Pope Leo does.
So, I mean, yes. But the only problem is that they are to Mr. Williams, who I don't know at all. I don't know who this is. I mean, yes, of course, but it's not. They're not trying to be pastoral. They're trying to be pastoral in the sense of ushering us into the new religion, but not in the terms of actually caring for the spiritual well-being. Or in a sense, they could argue that they care because they see it as if you start attending the new Mass, you were more in communion with what the Church wants for today. This is what the modernists say.
As recently as July, Leo said he was willing to sit down and talk with Latin Mass supporters, but he made no promises and seemed to echo Francis's concerns. People have used the liturgy as an excuse for advancing other topics. It's become a political tool. And
so this is really interesting. They say they've used the old Mass to advance certain political topics. This is such a gaslighting way of viewing it. Why? Because what they do is that they restrict the Latin Mass and they talk about insane communist talking points. And then when you oppose the communist talking points, they say, well, you are only using the Latin Mass as a political tool. You are using the Latin Mass as a political tool against climate change. So this is what they do. They are very, very smart.
That's very unfortunate. Leo said in an interview for a book published last month. Some conservative backers of the old right, nevertheless, see a window of opportunity.
And of course, when it came to this, Cardinal Burke said that we're ideologues. Okay, that's what Cardinal Burke thinks. So on one side, and I believe that I mentioned this in our first episode. On one side, Cardinal Sarah said, if you look at the practicing Christians today, they are the ones that are the traditional Latin Mass. And then on the other side, Cardinal Burke said, you're an ideologue, and I'm going to celebrate the Solemn High Mass for the Summorum Pontificum pilgrimage or whatever at St. Peter's Basilica, which I believe this article will talk about.
Leo has embraced traditional vestments and chants in Latin more than Francis ever did, a sign, they say, that he is open to the old ways. They also point to a concrete example of an opening, following an audience with Cardinal Raymond Burke, the American cleric and prominent critic of Francis. Leo personally authorized him to celebrate a pontifical Mass in Latin.
As many others have pointed out, he approved this, and he also approved Father James Martin Rainbow Mass. Personally approved of it. So this, if you're celebrating this, I just don't really even know what to say. When this Mass, yes, it hasn't taken place at St. Peter's Basilica in the last few years, but this Mass did take place during the Francis pontificate.
That service at St. Peter's Basilica on Saturday will mark the high point of a Vatican pilgrimage being made this week by supporters of the old right. The kind of Latin Mass that Burke will celebrate was prohibited during the last 2 years of Francis's papacy.
So there we go. That's why the article says the last 2 years of Francis's papacy. Okay, so is it really anything to get excited about? I mean, I guess if you really, really like the smells and bells without a lot of substance behind it, if that's your thing, then look, I'm not going to keep people from enjoying things. Okay, you can go ahead and do that.
Monsignor Marco Agostini, a papal master of ceremonies and official in the Vatican Secretariat of State who was one of the leading advocates of the Latin Mass in Rome, said Burke undoubtedly had a green light from the top, clearly, because the Pope said, "Let them do it."
Of course, Prevost will say, let them do it, no problem. And as I mentioned in our last episode, meanwhile, Catholic families in the Diocese of Knoxville are being left without their Mass. Again, they are pushing the doctrinal revolution, and then when you oppose the doctrinal revolution, they say that you're just politicizing the Mass. This is how evil these people are.
The current status of the Latin Mass is deeply entwined with the legacies of the past three popes. After Latin Mass was widely banned in the 1960s, John Paul II issued an order in 1984 allowing very limited exceptions. In 2007, Benedict's four-page order, Summorum Pontificum, kicked the door open far wider, arguing that the Latin Mass was loved by traditional Catholics who rightly lamented the deformation of the liturgy. He effectively ruled that priests should be able to offer the service to parishioners who wanted it.
I believe it has even been Michael Lofton. You know things are bad when even Michael Lofton is swinging the red flag. So Lofton said, when was the last general audience condemning rainbow masses? When was the last, really even in a general audience, even papal comment against this sort of celebrations? Meanwhile, bishops are unchecked in restricting the Latin Mass.
Then came Francis, who overturned Benedict in a 2021 order, Traditionis Custodes. Latin Masses, he said, should not be celebrated in parish churches.
And so this is just essentially going to talk about how Traditionis Custodes was preventing newly ordained priests from offering the Latin Mass, and so on and so forth. And then they say, in 2023, Francis said Catholics who longed for the old rite suffered from nostalgia disease. I love these comments. I just love these comments, and I miss them. I miss this sort of unhinged, off-the-hook comments. I know the resistance to Traditionis Custodes is terrible, Francis said. There is incredible support for restorationism, what I call backwardness. That's what Francis thought of us. Hey, he was very honest. He was extremely honest in his views of traditionalists, and we have to welcome that in an era of now Dr. Prevost, Pope Leo XIV, who is not honest, and we are being even deceived in a greater way than we were during the Francis years. I'm skipping a little bit over here in the interview. Then Francis says, but he added, this is Francis, we do not belong to those who shrink back.
But, he added, we do not belong to those who shrink back. Even Francis, however, made exceptions. Agostini appealed and received special permission from Francis to celebrate a weekly Latin service at Rome's St. Anne Lateran Catholic Church. Agostini said he received permission only because Francis liked him. He granted me what he forbade others, he said. That service today is a staple, not just for veil-wearing Italian grandmothers, but, as in other parts of Europe and the United States, also for a new generation of conservative Gen Zers.
Gen Zers. So I love this. Okay, so Francis gave him permission, and even the priest himself says, he allowed me what he forbade others just because he liked me.
Many of them are men, active on the political right, and significantly more devout than their parents. In the Latin service, they see a lost art of reverent worship and a bridge to a past era of moral certitude.
When I went to the old Mass, I was left breathless, both because of the liturgical beauty, but also because I felt so much more in touch with the Blessed Sacrament and with our Lord, said Giacomo Mollo, 24, a university student and former youth activist in the right-wing Brothers of Italy party. So again, they're saying the Latin Mass is very right-wing. And then they say, to essentially finish out the article, in Europe, where Catholics have abandoned the pews in droves, Mollo argued that young conservative Catholics have become enraptured by the beauty, solemnity, and profound spirituality of the old Mass. It's the best way, he said, to bring young people back to the church. So it looks like it's a universal, and this is the end of the article. So it looks like it's a universal belief that the Latin Mass brings people back to the faith, that it's something that appeals to what we want to find, which is God. We see the Latin Mass, and we say, truly God is here. We look at the Novus Ordo, and we say, there's no way that God can be here. There's no way that God can be pleased with this. And I'm sorry, but it's even when offered reverently. It's just really is what it is. So that's essentially what they're trying to get us to do, is to abandon the Latin Mass and start going to the Latin Mass to the Novus Ordo Mass in Latin with chant, reverent, and then eventually they'll start rolling back those things. But thankfully, here in this show, we are not just about the aesthetics. We care about the substance. So you can offer a Freemasonic rite with Gregorian chant, and that doesn't make it Catholic. Okay, that's what the way that we view it in this show. But anyway, that wraps up the Washington Post article regarding the old Mass that came out yesterday, Sunday. And then it seems that Nick Fuentes actually responded to his critics when it came to his comments regarding devotions, and it was sort of, he basically says what you heard here in this show last week. Let's see.
Good Goy 42069 sent $20. Hey Nick, the other day you said you liked what SSPX stood for, but you were afraid of schism. Pope Benedict XVI lifted the excommunications in 09, and Francis gave them faculties for confession and matrimony in 17. All this.
Yeah, stupid, I know that. I think you said the exact same thing last week. Again, I said it, I think you asked this question last week too, and you're just asking it again, or it's some other asshole who didn't listen the first time. I know that they are technically in communion with Rome. That's not my problem. My problem is that it's tending towards schism.
So, interesting comments that it's tending towards schism. Okay.
Because I know a lot of people that are involved in that, and they do think that they're better. They're haughty. They think that the Novus Ordo is not good enough for them.
So it's not that it's not good enough for us, it's that it's just not good. It's not for us. It's just it's not good.
They think that regular Catholics are not good enough for them. They think that you can only really be Catholic if you are in a secret society and go to the special Latin Mass, and that's not Catholic.
So that I'm not entirely sure that traditionalist Catholics believe this. You know, it really only comes to terms in a combination with the new Mass. So it's a fair question. Can you be Catholic and attend the new Mass? I think that's absolutely a fair question. But we don't say that if you go to a Latin Mass, you're a Catholic. That if you go to another one of the traditional rites, that you are not Catholic. There are traditionalist versions of the Eastern rites. Now, of course, I do believe that the institutional Eastern rites are Novus Ordo, basically. But it's really not just about the Latin Mass. It's about the faith.
That is schismatic. And so, no, I know that they're in communion with Rome. It's this tendency, because so much of that is informed by ideology. They all have the same politics. Have you met one of these tradcasts that isn't like a political reactionary? And so they are making the church a battleground for ideology, and they're not being obedient. The Pope.
So it seems that he's taking some of the comments that, for example, that Cardinal Sarah made. I don't know if he has listened to those. But what Cardinal Sarah was referencing, what I believe that he was referencing, was when he meant the church, he meant within the hierarchy.
Pope makes the rules, and the rules are Novus Ordo, that's a law of the land. Now, you can appreciate the traditional Mass, and you can prefer the traditional Mass, and you can recognize that maybe it's makes you feel more connected to the early Christians, or it's more reverent. That's fine. But the second you start to say, I look down on those other Catholics, I look down on the other Mass, that's not a real Mass.
The truth is that we don't look down on other Catholics. I mean, I have friends that are Protestant, and they're perfectly good friends with me. They're very good friends that are not Catholic. So I don't look down on Protestants. I don't look down on anybody, and I don't believe that in Mass that traditional some may, but I don't believe that we don't look down on anybody.
Is it even a valid Mass? Yeah, don't kid yourself. Those conversations happen. I've been there, and I hated it.
That's fine. You're free to not like those conversations. I mean, you don't have to like every conversation that you're in.
I was up there in Michigan with the church militant guys, and I was going to go to a Novus Ordo Mass on a Sunday instead of their super duper trad Mass, and they looked at me like I was a heretic, and I said,
as far as I knew, church militant was very Novus Ordo. Maybe the independent people weren't. I know that they would attend the Latin Mass when traveling and such, but just odd.
Hey, pal, the Pope's on my side here. You're sounding,
He was just making comments against Dr. Prevost a couple of weeks ago.
and you're sounding like a separatist. You know, I think the Pope should do whatever he wants, and you're sounding like a separatist. So I don't like it. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't like it. I know they're in communion. You're telling me things I know. I think you said the same thing last week. I know that. But I don't like the secret societies. And I got a lot of flack for,
This is fair enough. Like thinking that we have some special knowledge that is just completely top secret. Well, the gospel is all about being shared. So I mean, I can agree with this sentiment.
clip the other night where someone said, "What's your favorite feast day?" And I made a joke. I said, "I'm a cradle Catholic. Well, you're lucky if you get us to Mass outside of Christmas and Easter," was basically the joke. I said, "I'm a cradle Catholic. You think I have a favorite feast day?" I said, "I'm one of the Catholics that goes to Mass." And everybody, all these, it's so typical.
This is true. Everybody flipped out. To me, it wasn't worse, like a bad joke.
The Catholics are so touchy. They have no charity towards me at all. I'm making a joke at my own expense saying, "Oh, you're asking me for a feast day? That's a tall order for a cradle Catholic." That's a joke. And for those that don't know, the joke is that cradle Catholics, people that are born Catholic, they lose the religion. And so they go to Mass on Christmas and Easter. They don't really know what it's about. It's a joke. And so someone says, "What's your favorite feast day?" I'm saying, "Whoa, you're asking a lot for me. Hey, man, I just go to Mass.
I think this is a fair point, to be honest.
Lucky you're getting me in Mass. That's a joke." And all these Catholics reply to the clip. They say, "I can't believe he sounds demonic. This is troubling." It's like, you all know what I'm talking about. And I went further and I said, it's too many devotionals. We all know there's so many Catholics out there in this scene. It's not, most Catholics are not like this. It's like super trad Catholics. They're in SSPX or FSSP. And maybe not we all do, but me being in this world. And it is all that they come into the room with 15 necklaces on.
This is true.
I'm not making this up. They come in with 3 different necklaces on and the t-shirt. And like I said, they're in the FSSP. They will not go to Novus Ordo. And, they're doing the First Fridays. They're carrying around their wax candles. And it's like, hey, man, is this the expansion pack? And I'm going to be honest with you. If the devotionals do something for you, great. I'm not against them. But we all know there is a certain type that for them it becomes about the downloadable content. For them it becomes about all this.
I think this is absolutely true. This is absolutely true. So you can run into some people after Mass sometimes that they'll tell you how there are not only going to be the 3 days of darkness, but a bonus 4th. So this is true, and this can definitely be true. And I think we should take this specific aspect with some level of as a constructive criticism.
And I almost don't even recognize the religion then. I'm a Catholic. I believe in the gospel. I believe in the church, the doctrine, the dogma, the tradition. But then you get these people and they're talking about like Marian apparitions that are never verified. They're talking about, they got 100 necklaces on. They're talking about things that.
This is true. They're telling you about the latest, or maybe not latest, but some mystic priest or super secret apparition that you can watch this 10 YouTube videos about. This is true.
I've never heard of before. And like I said, the sacramentals and the devotionals are instituted because we're in a fallen time, but everything in its proper place. Everything in its proper place. The liturgy has to take precedent. The gospel has to take precedent. Christ has to take precedent. Some of the stuff is off the rails. We got to be honest.
Now, yes, some of the stuff is off the rails. I do agree with this. However, the one difference, though, is that this is going to be a few people at the average parish. This is not, they're not talking about this in droves. There's going to be the 1 or 2 person that is very zealous about a particular very, very obscure mystic or unapproved mystic or completely unapproved Marian apparition. But I don't think that this should be a criticism of the Latin Mass, because you will also run into these types of people at the Novus Ordo.
With ourselves about it. It's not commonplace, but in these circles, It's like it's a competition. It's in a very political scene. Everyone's ideological, and everyone's trying to outdo each other with how pious they are. And it's all the converts.
This is true. So what happens is that traditionalism is such a small pond. So then we have people that are competing on who's going to wear the nicest clothes, who's going to have the nicest watch, and things like that. Of course, when you're trying to have those competitions in a small pond, it becomes easier to appear like a cool guy. And we all know these people, okay? We all know these people. So again, this needs to be taken, in my opinion, as a constructive criticism. But he does point out something important. It does happen to be that a lot of these type of people are the converts.
It's converts trying to outdo each other with things they could buy, things they can wear. And some of them are well-intentioned, I'm sure, but some of them it's like, okay, so what religion is this? I'm Catholic. What are you? I went to CCD. I was baptized. And people are telling me about things I've never even heard of. They're telling me about the 3 days of darkness and they're telling me you got to carry around your emergency candles. And they're telling me, Mary told this person in the 50s that this, that, and the other is going to come to pass. And I'm like, okay, so what is this? So we have to be rooted in what should take precedent. That's why I said the other day, for me, it's the gospel, it's Christ, it's the Mass. And people said, you're sounding like a Protestant. I'm like, I don't know what you even sound like.
There we go. So that's the end of this particular clip. So I do agree with a lot of those things. I don't agree that because there's one or two crazy people at every Latin Mass parish that in and of itself is should condemn the entire Latin Mass movement, because you also have crazy people at the Novus Ordo. So maybe he should, if we want to go at it this way, then we can look at the rates of feminism in the Novus Ordo versus the Latin Mass. Are the higher rates of feminism do those by itself condemn the Novus Ordo? No, because the Novus Ordo has problems of its own where you don't even have to look at who's attending it. But I think that we should take a lot of this as constructive criticism. At the end of the day, the Latin Mass communities are a small pond. And some people can abuse that and go there because it makes it easier for them to appear as cool or as popular than in just the regular, essentially, out there. So we do have to be on the lookout for this sort of things. But it's a fallen world. At the end of the day, we are going to be getting these people no matter what. If not, if people misbehaving was not a problem from the very first centuries of Christianity, we wouldn't even have any of the Pauline epistles or any of the other of the New Testament epistles. We wouldn't need preachers if just everybody was perfect just by going to Mass. So we are going to be having those people. But then if we look at the crowds that attend the Novus Ordo, they have these problems and even worse problems. So we can't just grab this and then condemn the Latin Mass because of them. We have to, if we want to take a look at this way, we have to take a balanced look and then actually recognize that the Novus Ordo attenders have way more problems than the traditional Latin Mass attenders. If the problem in the TLM is that somebody has too many holy cards or too many necklaces, the problem in the Novus Ordo is going to be the rampant rates of feminism and how most of the women there are going to be completely unmarriable. So anyway, but this is how we're going to be wrapping up the episode. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure that you like this video. That's going to be very important. And we'll see you. So today's Monday. We'll see you, God willing, on Thursday. So far, I said we'll be having new episodes on Mondays and Thursdays. Hey, the first episode was Thursday. This is Monday. So happy that you were here. Happy to see you. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you all on Thursday.